After the accident left me in a wheelchair, my own son started whispering in my ear, "That Social Security check is mine. You don't need anything." For 3 years, I lived on scraps of food while he got fat on money I worked my whole life for. Good afternoon, my dear friends. What a joy to chat with you today. I'm Martha Wilson, 78 years young. I was born in Bakersfield, California, but today I live here in Springfield, Missouri, a welcoming town where I found peace after so much turmoil. I'm sitting here on the porch of my simple little house with my spring flowers all in bloom, adding color to the garden my granddaughter Sarah helps me tend to. These days, I spend my time crocheting. It's become both my livelihood and my therapy after everything I've been through. I started making these pieces when I was still confined to my wheelchair, a way to keep my mind and hands busy when it seemed like my world had ended. At first, I just did it to pass the time, but soon neighbors started placing orders, and now I even sell online. Can you believe it? Sarah taught me how this Facebook business works. I even have a little group of loyal customers. My little corner here is simple, but it's mine. I have my herb pots, basil, rosemary, mint, that I use to season food and make teas. Their smell reminds me of the farm where I grew up, of my mother cooking on the wood stove. I also have an old but comfortable armchair where I sit to watch my shows in the evening. And it's in that chair that I'm sitting now, telling you my story. And you, my dear friends watching now, tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. You know, today I'm going to tell a difficult story, but one that needs to be told. A story about how life can change in the blink of an eye and how we can be betrayed by those who should protect us most. I'll talk about a dark time in my life when I was in a wheelchair and my own son. Well, let's take it slow. To understand properly, I need to go back to when I was just a little girl in Bakersfield, running barefoot through the cotton fields, never imagining what life had in store for me. I was born in Bakersfield in 1947, in a simple wooden house with a tin roof, right near the cotton fields. My father, George Wilson, was a cotton picker, a man with calloused hands and a gentle heart. My mother, Eleanor, took care of the house and us, the 5 children. I was the middle child, between 2 older siblings, Robert and Mary, and 2 younger ones, Jane and Thomas. Our house had only 3 rooms, a living room that was also the kitchen, with a wood stove that Mom lit before dawn, and 2 bedrooms where we squeezed in to sleep. The yard was large, with peach trees, apple trees, and a lemon tree that my father planted when I was born. We had chickens, a dog named Spot, and a vegetable garden that provided almost everything we needed to eat. On the living room walls, there was a picture of Jesus and a black and white photograph from my parents' wedding. Our life was simple, but rich in affection. Early rising was the rule in our house. At 5 in the morning, Dad was already up, drinking the strong coffee Mom had ready for him before heading to the fields. We children would get up around 6. Mom prepared cornmeal mush with milk from Mr. Peterson's cow, our neighbor. Then we would clean the house together. Each of us had our task. Mine was to sweep the yard, collect eggs from the chickens, and help hang clothes on the line. Around 8 years old, I started going to school, Oakdale Elementary, which was almost an hour's walk from our house. We went on foot, my siblings and I, along a dusty dirt road that cut through the cotton fields. In rainy weather, we arrived with muddy feet. In dry weather, covered in dust. But we were happy on that path. We played at guessing shapes in the clouds, sang songs we learned from my grandmother Theodora, and made up stories about the people who lived on the farms we passed. At school, my favorite teacher was Mrs. Baker, a lady with gray hair tied in a bun, who had the patience of a saint. She was the one who taught me to read and write, opening the doors to a new world for me. I loved books, even though we had very few at home, just an old Bible and some almanacs that my father brought from town. When I learned to read well, I would read everything aloud to my mother while she cooked or sewed. The games back then were simple. Playing Ring Around the Rosie in the schoolyard, hopscotch drawn with charcoal on the hard-packed earth of our yard, corn husk dolls with straw hair that my grandmother taught me to make. The boys played ball made from old socks, stuffed with scraps, and flew kites made with bamboo sticks and tissue paper. On weekends, we'd go to the creek that ran near our house. It was narrow, but had clear waters where we caught small fish and bathed on hot summer afternoons. The food was what the land gave us. For breakfast, besides the cornmeal mush, we ate cornbread that Mom baked once a week. For lunch, there was almost always rice, beans, a vegetable from the garden, and, on good days, a small piece of meat or fried egg. Dinner was potato soup with dried meat or leftovers from lunch. During the 4th of July celebrations, which were the most exciting in Bakersfield, Mom made corn pudding, corn on the cob, and cornbread. The whole town gathered in the central square for parades, fireworks, and festivities. It was around this time, when I was about 10, that I began to notice my family was going through hard times. Cotton wasn't bringing in as much money as before, and Dad started to worry. I remember him and Mom talking quietly at night, thinking we were asleep. They talked about trying life somewhere else, looking for work in the big city. I didn't understand much at the time, but I felt a tightness in my chest when I saw that worried expression on their faces. In 1958, when I was 11, news came that would change our lives. Dad's uncle, who lived in Springfield, Missouri, offered him a job at a textile factory that was expanding. It would be a steady job with a regular paycheck at the end of the month, something that the cotton farm no longer guaranteed. After much discussion and some tears from Mom, who didn't want to leave her hometown, the decision was made. We would move to Springfield. I remember like it was yesterday, the day we left Bakersfield. It was a Sunday morning, and the truck that would carry our few pieces of furniture was already loaded. Mom looked one last time at the lemon tree in the yard. Dad said goodbye to the neighbors with strong hugs, and we children cried as we said goodbye to Spot, our dog, who would stay with Mr. Peterson's family. We left with heavy hearts, but also with hope for better days in the new city. We didn't know at that moment that life in Springfield would bring so much joy, but also great challenges for our family, especially for me. The move to Springfield opened a new chapter in our lives. We settled in a simple house in the North Side neighborhood, not far from the factory where Dad started working. It was bigger than our little house in Bakersfield, with 4 rooms and a small yard where Mom soon planted a garden. Adaptation was difficult at first. We were the Hicks from California, as some children at the new school called us. But soon we made friends and got used to the way of life in that city, which, unlike Bakersfield, already had more of a big city feel, with its wide streets and busy downtown. The years passed, and life took its course. I finished elementary school, but couldn't continue. I needed to help at home. I started working at 15 as a helper in a clothing store near home. It was there that I met Robert Miller, a tall young man with an easy smile who delivered fabrics to the seamstresses. He was 5 years older than me, son of Irish immigrants who had a small grocery store in town. We dated for 3 years and got married in 1966 when I was 19. Our wedding was simple, at the First Baptist Church in Springfield, with a small party in Robert's parents' backyard. We went to live in a room at the back of their grocery store while we saved money to buy our own place. Robert worked with his father at the store, and I continued at the clothing shop. In 1967, our first son, David, was born. 3 years later, in 1970, our daughter, Linda, came along. The family was complete, and in 1972, we managed to buy a small house of our own in the Woodland Heights neighborhood. Life was peaceful. We worked hard, raised our children, visited my parents on weekends. They still lived in North Side. Robert took over the grocery store when his father passed away in 1975, and I left the clothing shop to help him with the business. Those were years of a lot of work, but also a lot of unity. David and Linda grew up, studied. We made sure they had the opportunity we didn't have. David was interested in business from an early age, and when he finished high school, came to work with us at the grocery store. He already had big plans, talked about transforming that small business into something bigger. Linda, my daughter, was always quieter, more studious. She graduated as a teacher from Springfield State College and started teaching at a local elementary school. In 1990, she married Jerome, a bank employee, and moved to St. Louis. I felt her departure deeply, but was happy when she came to visit with my grandchildren, Sarah and Michael. Life followed its course, with its normal joys and sorrows, until 2005, when I was 58, and the tragedy that would change everything happened. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were returning from lunch at friend's house. It was raining hard, and on a curve on the highway between Springfield and Branson, a truck lost control and hit our car head-on. Robert died instantly. I survived, but with serious injuries to my spine. I spent 3 months in the regional hospital, between surgeries and recovery. When I finally returned home, I was in a wheelchair. The doctors were clear. I would not walk again. It was a terrible blow, losing my husband and my independence all at once. David, who was 38 at the time, took over caring for me and managing the grocery store, which had already transformed into a small market. At first, he seemed to handle the situation well. He was attentive, patient. He hired a young woman to help me during the day while he worked at the market. Linda would come from St. Louis on weekends, when she could, to visit and give support. Gradually, I adapted to the new reality. I learned to do some things on my own in the wheelchair, started crocheting to pass the time. A neighbor taught me, said it was good for exercising my hands and mind. But I noticed that David began to change. The responsibility seemed to be weighing too heavily on him. He, who had always been cheerful and talkative like his father, became quiet, with a closed expression. The market accounts weren't going well. He had debts with suppliers. And there was also his girlfriend, Jessica, with whom he had been living for some years, but who never got along with me. She said I was old-fashioned and found fault with everything she did. It was about 6 months after the accident that things really started to go downhill. One afternoon, David came home with a paper in his hand. It was a power of attorney, he said, so he could take care of my affairs since I was incapacitated. At that moment, I saw no malice. I trusted my son. I signed the document without reading it properly, thinking it was to facilitate the administration of the market and my disability benefits, which I had started to receive. A week later, the young woman who helped me was dismissed. "We need to save money," said David. Jessica would come a few times a week to check on me. Food began to become scarce, the house got increasingly dirty, my clothes weren't always washed. When I complained, I heard that I was being ungrateful, that they were already doing a lot for me. One day, I asked about the money from my Social Security disability checks, which should cover my basic expenses and medications. That's when David exploded for the first time. "You think that pittance is enough for what? It barely pays for the expensive medications you need to take. I still have to take from my own pocket to support you." I was shocked by the aggressiveness in his voice, so different from the loving boy I had raised. The following week, when Linda called, she didn't visit as much because of work and the children. I asked to speak privately. I tried to tell her what was happening, but David stayed nearby the whole time, listening to the conversation, and I didn't have the courage to say anything. Only later did I understand that he controlled everything: the visits, the phone calls, what came in and went out of that house. That's when I began to realize I had fallen into a trap. My own son, my flesh and blood, was mistreating me. Not with punches or slaps, but with something that hurts just as much: neglect, emotional abandonment, control of my money. I, who had always been independent, hard-working, was there, trapped in a wheelchair, completely at his mercy. The worst moment was when I discovered, by chance, that the market had been sold. I found a paper under the living room table. It must have fallen from David's pocket. It was a sales receipt with a much higher value than I imagined our small business was worth. The market that we had built with so much sacrifice, which was half mine by right after Robert's death, had been sold without my real knowledge. The power of attorney I signed gave him that power. When I confronted David, came the most painful revelation. You don't have anything anymore, understand? The market was mine by right. I was the one who made it grow. The money from your disability barely pays for your medications. If it wasn't for me, you'd be in a nursing home. You should thank me for still having a roof. That night, alone in my room, I cried like I had never cried before. Not for the money or the market, but for the betrayal. How could my own son treat me like this? What had happened to that sweet boy I had cradled in my arms? And the worst part, I was trapped with no way out. Unable to walk, with no money of my own, with no one to help me. Linda was far away, in St. Louis with her own life. My siblings were scattered. Robert had passed away, Mary lived in Pennsylvania, Jane in Texas, and Thomas, I didn't even know where he was anymore. That night marked the beginning of the 3 most difficult years of my life. 3 years of daily humiliations, of scarce food, of medications that didn't always come at the right time, of dirty clothes, of loneliness. 3 years in which I learned what true helplessness is. And all this at the hands of the one I loved most, from whom I least expected it. Those 3 years were a long nightmare. What started with small signs of neglect turned into a complete system of abuse and control. My room, at the back of the house, became my prison. David and Jessica occupied the main bedroom and the living room, and I rarely left my space, except to go to the bathroom when someone was willing to help me, which didn't always happen when necessary. The wheelchair, which should have been my ally for some independence, was often kept out of my reach. So you don't fall trying to leave on your own, David said with false concern. I knew the truth. It was to keep me trapped, dependent, unable to even go out to the sidewalk in front of the house. Meals became increasingly scarce and of worse quality. While they ate meat and fresh food, I was served leftovers from previous days or inferior quality food. You can't eat too much fat because of your health, was the excuse. Many times lunch was just a plate of rice with watery beans with no side dish. Dinner, frequently, didn't exist at all. It's already late. Tomorrow you'll eat properly, they'd say when I complained of hunger at night. My medications, essential for controlling my blood pressure and chronic back pain, began to run out. The pharmacy is out of stock. The doctor needs to renew the prescription. It's too expensive. We have to wait until next month. The excuses varied, but the result was the same. Days and even weeks without the necessary medication, with pains that made me cry softly at night so as not to disturb and suffer more reprisals. Personal hygiene became a rare luxury. Bathing, which should have been daily given my condition, happened 2 or 3 times a week when Jessica had time to help me. Even so, it was rushed, careless, often with cold water. There's no gas to heat so much water, she would say, while I shivered with cold even on the hottest days. My clothes were rarely washed, and the bed changed perhaps once a month. The odor in the room was constant, increasing my shame and humiliation. The money from my Social Security disability, which should have at least guaranteed my basic comfort, completely disappeared in David's hands. When I mentioned once that I needed a new blouse because the only one I had was already torn, he exploded. You think money grows on trees? Do you have any idea how much I spend on you? The medications, the food, the water and electricity you consume staying at home all day? You should be grateful you're not in a public nursing home. I discovered by chance that David had bought a new car with the money from the market sale. They had also renovated the kitchen with new cabinets and modern appliances, things I only saw when, rarely, they took me out of my room. The contrast between the luxury they lived in and the conditions they kept me in was shocking. The worst part, perhaps, was the isolation. David rigorously controlled my communications with the outside world. The landline phone was in the living room, out of my reach. When I asked for a cell phone to at least be able to call my daughter when I felt the need, I was ridiculed. What for? To keep bothering Linda with nonsense? She has her own life. She can't be listening to your complaints all the time. Visits became rare. When Linda called saying she would come to see me, frequently David would invent a last-minute excuse. I was too sick to receive visits, we had an unavoidable commitment, the house was under renovation. Over time, my daughter began to call less and less, perhaps believing that I really didn't want or couldn't see her. The few neighbors who tried to visit me were met with hostility. My mother is resting. Today is not a good day. Come back another time. Eventually, people gave up. David spread around the neighborhood that I had mental problems after the accident, that I became confused and made things up. Thus, if I managed to talk to someone and report what was happening, I wouldn't be taken seriously. Only one person persisted in trying to see me, Mrs. Harris, a lady of almost 80 who lived 2 houses down. She came almost every week, bringing a small cake or a sweet, and David didn't have the courage to completely bar a lady of that age, respected in the neighborhood. Even so, he or Jessica always stayed in the room during the visits, ensuring that I couldn't tell what was really happening. During one of these visits, when Jessica left for a moment to answer the phone, I managed to whisper to Mrs. Harris, "Help me, please. They're taking my money. They're not feeding me properly." Her expression was one of shock, but before she could respond, Jessica returned. The following week, David said I had a bad flu and couldn't receive anyone. After that, Mrs. Harris couldn't see me anymore. There was always an excuse. The verbal humiliations were constant, especially when David drank, which began to happen frequently. "Look what's left of my mother, a useless person, dead weight," he would say to Jessica, as if I wasn't there or couldn't hear. "I have to carry an old woman on my back who's good for nothing." Jessica usually laughed or added her own insults. And she still complains about the food, as if she deserved better. In 2007, I began to develop bed sores, wounds on the skin caused by lack of movement and the constant moisture of the rarely changed bed sheets. The pain was excruciating, but when I asked to be taken to the doctor, David refused. We don't have money to be running to the doctor for every little thing. Only when the wounds became infected, with a strong odor and discharge, did he take me to the emergency room, fearing that I would die and he would be held responsible. At the hospital, the doctor was horrified by my condition. Malnourished, dehydrated, with infected bed sores and clear signs of neglect. He asked how I was being cared for at home. Before I could answer, David intervened. "Doctor, we do our best, but age takes its toll. And she refuses to eat properly. You know how elderly people are." The doctor seemed suspicious, but didn't insist. He prescribed antibiotics and gave instructions about caring for the wounds. At home, the prescribed treatment was only partially followed. The antibiotics, yes, because David feared that I would get worse and return to the hospital, where they could ask more questions. But the dressings were done carelessly, and the food continued to be precarious. A perverse cycle developed. The weaker I became from poor nutrition, the less I could defend myself or seek help. In 2008, I began to have dark thoughts. Perhaps it would be better to die at once, instead of continuing to suffer that slow daily death, made of small and large cruelties. I even saved some pills, thinking of taking them all at once. But something stopped me. Perhaps faith in God, perhaps stubborn hope that someone would notice my situation and help me. The winter of 2008 was particularly difficult. The house was cold, without proper insulation, and my room at the back was the coldest of all. I didn't have enough blankets, just an old and thin comforter. I developed pneumonia that almost took me. This time, when David took me to the hospital, already almost unconscious, I stayed hospitalized for 2 weeks. It was during this hospitalization that I had a small ray of hope. A nurse, Nancy, noticed the signs of prolonged neglect, not just the bed sores, but also the evident malnutrition, the toenails never cut, the tangled hair that hadn't been properly washed for months. When David wasn't around, she asked me directly if I was being well cared for at home. I hesitated. Years of abuse had taught me to fear the consequences of speaking out. What if David found out? What if no one believed me? What if the situation got even worse when I returned home? But Nancy's kind look gave me courage. With a trembling voice, I told a bit of my situation. Not everything, just enough for her to understand that something was very wrong. Nancy promised to seek help, to talk to the hospital's social worker. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But David, always vigilant, noticed that I was talking too much with the nurse. The next day, he demanded my discharge from the hospital, against medical recommendations, claiming that he would take care of me at home. Back in my domestic prison, the situation worsened. David, suspecting that I had said something, became even more controlling and cruel. If you think anyone will believe a senile old woman over the devoted son who takes care of her, you're very mistaken. Any complaint, and you go straight to a public nursing home, one of those where old people are tied to the bed and full of sores. The threat of the nursing home was his constant trump card. He knew that I feared more than anything being abandoned in an impersonal place, among strangers, far from any possibility of rescue. At least at home, as bad as it was, I still had the small hope that someday my daughter would discover the truth, or some neighbor would notice and report it. The year 2009 began as gloomy as the previous one had ended. I no longer had the strength to resist or protest. I accepted the scarce food without complaining, didn't ask for medications anymore when the pains increased, didn't beg for a bath, even when the smell of my own body disgusted me. I had resigned myself to that half-life, that shadow existence. But fate, sometimes, has surprising paths. In March of that year, I received an unexpected visit that would change everything. Linda, my daughter, appeared without warning. She had tried to call several times in the previous weeks, but David always said I was sleeping or indisposed. Worried about the growing difficulty in talking to me, she decided to come in person, bringing my granddaughter Sarah, who was 16 at the time. David wasn't home that day. He had gone to a neighboring town to take care of business. Jessica tried to prevent Linda from entering, saying I was very sick, but my daughter was firm. She's my mother, and I'm going to see her now. When Linda entered my room and saw my condition, thin, dirty, with poorly cared for wounds in an unsanitary environment, the shock on her face said it all. "Mom, for God's sake, what have they done to you?" At that moment, the barriers I had built to endure the suffering without going crazy crumbled. I began to cry like a lost child, unable to speak for a few minutes. When I finally managed to calm down, I told everything. The power of attorney signed without understanding, the Social Security money diverted, the market sold without my real consent, the food denied, the rationed medications, the verbal abuse, the forced isolation. Linda listened to everything in silence, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, my granddaughter, held my hand, crying too. When I finished speaking, Linda took out her cell phone and made 2 calls, one to her husband Jerome in St. Louis and another to the local police. "This ends today, Mom," she said with a determination I had never seen before in her voice. "I'm taking you out of here right now." March 2009 marked the end of my captivity. When Linda saw my condition, her reaction was immediate and decisive. "We're going to end this today," she said, with a firmness she had never shown before. She called Jerome in St. Louis and the local police, briefly explaining the situation. While we waited, Linda and Sarah tried to improve my condition. My daughter gave me a careful bath, washed my tangled hair, and changed my clothes. Each movement revealed a new mark of neglect on my body, the bed sores on my back and buttocks, the unexplained bruises, the ingrown toenails. "Mom, how did they let you get to this point?" Linda murmured through tears, while trying to be gentle so as not to hurt me more. The police arrived before David returned. 2 officers, a man and a woman, documented my condition and the precarious environment where I lived. Officer Sullivan had experience with elder abuse cases and asked detailed questions about my financial situation, the power of attorney, the sale of the market. She took my testimony patiently, allowing me to rest when emotion overcame me. "Mrs. Miller, you're safe now," she assured me. "We'll make sure you receive the necessary care and that those responsible are punished." Her firm voice gave me comfort, but I still feared David's reaction when he discovered what was happening. I didn't have to wait long. David arrived when the police were still at the house. Seeing the patrol cars parked in front, he entered hastily, his expression changing from surprise to anger when he saw the scene in my room. Me clean and changed, Linda by my side, the officers documenting everything. "What's this? What are you doing in my house?" he shouted, trying to take control of the situation. When the officers explained they were investigating allegations of abuse and neglect, he tried his usual strategy. "My mother has mental problems since the accident. She makes things up. Ask any neighbor how well I take care of her." But it was too late for his lies. The evidence was there, visible in my mistreated body, in the unsanitary room, in the refrigerator full of good food that never reached my plate. And more importantly, there were witnesses now. Not just Linda and Sarah, but the officers who documented every detail. While the police took David in for questioning, Linda took me straight to the hospital. Jerome arrived from St. Louis that same night, driving as fast as he could when he learned of the situation. At the hospital, I was admitted immediately. The diagnosis was harsh: severe malnutrition, dehydration, infected bed sores, anemia, pneumonia in its early stages. "A few more months in these conditions, and you might not have survived," the doctor said bluntly. I spent 3 weeks hospitalized, receiving intensive treatment. Linda stayed with me the whole time, sleeping in a chair next to my bed, only leaving to resolve the accumulating legal issues. Jerome returned to St. Louis to take care of the children and work, but came on weekends. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, came after school, bringing drawings to brighten up the hospital room. During this period, a lot happened in the legal field. Linda hired Mr. Edwards, a lawyer specializing in elder rights, who filed actions to annul the power of attorney I had signed under coercion, recover control of my Social Security benefits, and investigate what had happened with the money from the market sale. A criminal case was also opened against David for financial abuse and neglect of a vulnerable person. The investigation revealed the extent of the abuse. David had sold the market for a value much higher than what he told me, bought a new car, renovated the house, and still had a considerable amount in a bank account in his name. All this while, I went hungry and lived in degrading conditions. The power of attorney was annulled by the court, and a protective order was issued, preventing David from approaching me. After being discharged from the hospital, I couldn't return to that house of horrors. Linda and Jerome took me to St. Louis to live with them temporarily while we decided what to do. Their apartment wasn't adapted for a wheelchair, but they rearranged the furniture to facilitate my movement. The most important thing was that, for the first time in years, I felt safe and loved. Physical recovery was slow. The bed sores needed months to completely heal. The anemia and malnutrition improved with proper nutrition, but my body was debilitated by years of neglect. I needed intensive physical therapy to regain strength in my arms and improve my mobility in the wheelchair. Emotional recovery was even more challenging. I suffered from frequent nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, believing I was still trapped in that room. I had sudden crying fits, moments of panic when I was alone for too long. The worst was the wound of betrayal. How could my own son, whom I had raised with so much love, treat me that way? It was Dr. Monroe, a psychologist recommended by the hospital, who helped me start to process all this trauma. In weekly sessions, I learned to talk about what had happened, to express the anger and disappointment I felt, to understand that I wasn't to blame for David's behavior. "You did nothing to deserve this treatment," Dr. Monroe repeated. "The responsibility is entirely his." 6 months after the rescue, in September 2009, we made an important decision. It didn't make sense to continue in St. Louis, where the small apartment made my mobility difficult, and Linda and Jerome had to completely reorganize their lives to accommodate me. Using part of the money recovered from the market sale, the court determined that 50% of the value belonged to me by right. We bought a single-story house in Springfield, adapted for a wheelchair, in a different neighborhood from the previous one, where no one knew my story. Linda took a 6-month leave from her job as a teacher to help me with the transition. We hired Mrs. Jenkins, a professional caregiver who came during the day to help me with hygiene, food, and medication. Gradually, I regained some independence, learning to do more things on my own in the wheelchair. My granddaughter Sarah, who was finishing high school, decided to apply for college in nursing, inspired by what she had witnessed. "Grandma, I want to help people like you, who don't have a voice," she said. Her affection and dedication were fundamental to my recovery. As for David, the legal process followed its course. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for financial abuse and neglect, but got the right to serve the sentence in an open regime. The most important thing for me wasn't the punishment, but the protection. The protective order remained valid, ensuring he couldn't approach me. Jessica disappeared as soon as the case came to light. I later learned that she already had a history of getting involved with men who mistreated elderly family members to get their money. She was part of the scheme, not just a passive spectator. The money recovered judicially gave me financial stability. Besides half the value from the market sale, I regained control of my Social Security benefits. It wasn't much, but enough to live with dignity, pay the caregiver, and the ongoing medical treatments that my condition required. News of my case spread through the small city, as was to be expected. Some people distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the scandal. Others, however, came closer, offering genuine support and friendship. Mrs. Harris, the neighbor who had tried to help me before, was one of the first to visit me in the new house. "I always knew something was wrong," she said, "but I never imagined it was so serious." The terrible experience I lived ended up having an unexpected purpose. With the help of Linda and Mr. Edwards, I began to participate in talks about elder rights at community centers and senior groups. I shared my story as a warning, showing that abuse can happen in any family, even when least expected. If it's happening to you or someone you know, seek help, I would say at the meetings. Call the Elder Abuse Hotline, look for adult protective services, talk to a trusted neighbor. Don't suffer in silence like I did. In 2010, a year after my rescue, we founded a small support group for elderly victims of abuse in Springfield. We met monthly at the neighborhood association, sharing experiences and information about rights and available resources. It was a way to transform my pain into something useful, to give meaning to the suffering I had gone through. Those dark years don't define who I am, but what I learned from them is now part of me. I learned about the human capacity for cruelty, but also for kindness and redemption. I learned that it's never too late to start over, to find a new purpose. And above all, I learned that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the first step toward liberation. Today, at 78, I live a peaceful and dignified life here in Springfield, in the same adapted little house we bought in 2009. The years have passed and many things have changed, but the feeling of security and peace I found after that rescue continues to be my greatest wealth. My routine is simple and cozy. I wake up early, around 6 in the morning, a habit I never lost since childhood on the farm. The first thing I do is thank God for another day, for being alive and well cared for. Then comes breakfast, which I prepare myself in the adapted kitchen. I've developed several techniques to manage in the wheelchair. The lower countertop, the sliding cabinet doors, and shelves within reach make all the difference. I usually spend the mornings crocheting on the front porch where I can feel the sun and see the street activity. This handiwork, which I started during the difficult years as a form of distraction, has become my therapy and also a small source of income. I make blankets, rugs, scarves, and, mainly, baby clothes that I sell online, thanks to my granddaughter Sarah, who created a Facebook page to show my work. Mrs. Jenkins, my caregiver, still comes 3 times a week to help me with the heavier house cleaning and with the complete bath. On other days, I manage well with the adaptations that were made in the bathroom: the support bars, the shower bench, and the handheld shower. It's a huge victory for me to be able to take care of my personal hygiene after so many years completely dependent on others. Lunch is a special moment of my day. I like to cook simple dishes from my childhood: rice, beans, meat stewed with potatoes, always with fresh herbs from the little garden I keep in adapted pots at the height of my wheelchair. Sometimes, when my hands hurt too much because of arthritis, I buy a meal from Mrs. Wilson's restaurant, here on the corner, who knows my tastes and always takes care with the seasoning. The afternoons are dedicated to different activities, depending on the day. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I go to the Senior Community Center, where I participate in a craft group and lectures on health and rights. It's there that our support group for elderly victims of abuse continues to meet, now with the support of the city. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I receive a visit from the physical therapist, Maria, who helps me maintain mobility in my arms and prevent the dreaded bed sores. Fridays are special: the day to receive a visit from my granddaughter, Sarah, who is now 32, already a graduated nurse, married and with a 2-year-old son, my great-grandson Michael. She moved to Springfield after graduating, precisely to be closer to me. Seeing her playing with little Michael on the carpet in my living room fills my heart with a joy I can't describe. It's as if life had come full circle, bringing back the innocence and hope that I once thought I had lost forever. The weekends are quieter. I watch church services on television on Sunday morning. I still don't feel comfortable in crowds, a remnant of the years of forced isolation. In the afternoon, I like to read. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, but with reading glasses I can delight in novels and history books. Reading, which was my refuge in childhood, has once again become a great companion in old age. Linda and Jerome, who still live in St. Louis, come to visit me at least once a month. My daughter retired as a teacher 2 years ago and now has more time to spend with me. We are closer than ever. The trauma we went through together created a special bond between us. She understands my fragilities, respects my moments of sadness, and celebrates with me each small daily victory. Financially, I live a modest but comfortable life. My Social Security, combined with the small income I get from crafts, covers my basic needs. The money recovered from the market sale was largely used in the purchase and adaptation of the house, but a small reserve still gives me security for medical emergencies. It's not a life of luxury, but after what I went through, having healthy food on the table, clean clothes in the closet, and medications on time is already an immense luxury. My health, considering everything I went through, is surprisingly good. The wheelchair continues to be my inseparable companion. The injuries to the spine from the accident were irreversible. I have high blood pressure problems, controlled with medication, and arthritis that makes some movements difficult, especially on cold days. But I consider myself fortunate. Many at my age and with my history of trauma would be in much worse conditions. The relationship with David continues to be an open wound. He served his sentence in an open regime and, from what I heard, moved to a town in Arkansas afterward. He never tried to contact me directly. The protective order and, perhaps, shame keep him away. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I still find myself thinking about him, wondering where I went wrong, what I could have done differently. Dr. Monroe, my psychologist whom I still see monthly, helps me understand that I wasn't to blame, that some people make bad choices regardless of how they were raised. One of the greatest joys of my current life is the recognition I receive for the work with other elderly people. Last year, I received a tribute from the City Council for 10 years of dedication to the support group. Seeing people who went through similar situations finding strength to start over, often inspired by my story, gives meaning to all the suffering I went through. The neighbors on the street where I live have become a second family. Mrs. Harris, that same lady who tried to help me in the difficult times, ended up moving near my new house by coincidence. At 98, still lucid and active, she is my companion for 5 o'clock tea every Wednesday. Mr. Thompson, a widowed gentleman who lives across the street, always appears with some fruit from his yard or to fix something that broke in the house. Technology has also brought positive changes to my life. Sarah taught me how to use a tablet where I can see family photos, talk by video with Linda when she's in St. Louis, and even sell my crafts online. I never imagined, in that childhood in Bakersfield, running barefoot through the cotton fields, that one day I would be connected to the entire world through a small screen in the palm of my hand. If I look back, I see a life of ups and downs, of deep pains, but also of great joys. The time I spent in that dark room, treated as a burden, could have embittered me forever. But I chose a different path, that of gratitude for the small blessings of each day, for the sun that enters through the porch window, for the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, for the smile of my great-grandson. In Springfield, I found not just a home, but a purpose. Here, in this city that saw me suffer, but also saw me reborn, I learned that it's never too late to start over. As that old saying my mother used to repeat goes, God writes straight with crooked lines. And the lines of my life, as crooked as they may have been at times, brought me exactly where I should be. My dear friends who have followed me to this point, after sharing my story with you, I feel I need to leave some advice that comes from the bottom of my heart and my own painful experience. If you are an elderly person who is going through a situation of abuse, or know someone in that condition, pay close attention to what I'm going to say. Financial abuse against the elderly is a silent violence, which often occurs within the home itself, practiced by those who should protect us. It starts subtly. A son or relative who helps manage the Social Security money, who asks you to sign documents without explaining properly, who takes control of bank accounts to make things easier. Little by little, the elderly person loses autonomy, voice, and dignity. I learned in the worst possible way that blindly trusting, even in children or close relatives, can be dangerous when it comes to money. Don't be ashamed to check bank statements, to ask for clear explanations about your finances, to consult a lawyer before signing any document. Your money is the fruit of your work, of your entire life of effort. You have every right to know where and how it's being used. If you are living in a situation of abuse, know that there are ways to get out of it. The first step, and perhaps the most difficult, is to break the silence. Tell someone you trust, another family member, a neighbor, a health professional. There are public agencies prepared to help you. The Elder Abuse Hotline receives anonymous complaints 24 hours a day. Adult Protective Services in your city offers support, and many cities have specialized resources for these cases. For families, I leave a warning. Be alert to signs of financial abuse in elderly relatives. Sudden changes in wills or in the control of assets, unexplained withdrawals of money, relatives who prevent visits, or excessively control the elderly person's contacts, all this may indicate that something is wrong. An unexpected visit, like the one my daughter Linda made, can save a life. For health professionals, social workers, and caregivers, you are often the first and only line of defense for vulnerable elderly people. An attentive look, a question asked in private, can open the door for the elderly person to reveal the abuse they are suffering. That's how it was with Nurse Nancy, who noticed the signs of neglect on my body and had the courage to ask. To the elderly who, like me, managed to free themselves from abusive situations. Our story doesn't end with trauma. There is life, there is purpose, there is joy after suffering. Using our experience to help others, as I do in the support group, can transform pain into something positive. It's never too late to start over, to rediscover small joys, to create new bonds. For society as a whole, I ask for more attention and respect for the elderly. Aging doesn't mean losing value or rights. The wisdom we've accumulated over decades deserves to be heard and respected. The experience we bring can be valuable for younger generations. Don't treat us as burdens, as problems to be solved, as people who have lived too long and are now just waiting for the end. I thank you from the bottom of my heart to all who have accompanied me on this journey of memories. Some sweet, others bitter, but all part of what made me who I am today. Sharing my story wasn't easy, but I hope it serves as a warning and hope for those who need it. My dear friends, if this video touched your soul, please don't move on without doing 3 important things. Click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications right now. This small gesture of yours can literally save the life of another elderly person who is suffering in silence, just like I suffered. Each subscription helps this message reach further, to enter more homes where there might be someone being mistreated by their own child, as happened to me. If you know someone who takes care of an elderly person and seems more interested in the Social Security money than in the person's well-being, share this video immediately with your family groups, with your friends, with your neighbors. Also, leave a comment telling if there has ever been a similar case in your family, or if you know someone who needs help. And do it now. Don't wait even 1 more minute, because while you're watching this video, there's a grandma or grandpa suffering financial abuse somewhere.